guys, welcome to the tutorial for the Jade Moto jacket. I'm so excited to sew with you today. I love this jacket so much. It is fully lined. It has my favorite detail, which is the like modern racer collar. We have pockets, we have two-piece sleeves, we have some nice top stitching. So with all of that, I have put this under the skill level of intermediate. I will say I think this is closer to advanced than it is to beginner, but as always, I spend a lot of time refining the construction process and trying to make my instructions just like as straightforward as possible so that anyone can make it with just a little time and effort. In terms of fit, this is a pretty slim fitting jacket through the shoulders, chest, and arms, and then it comes out into a nice little boxy hem. So for sizing, you can stick to your true like traditional size that you tend to go to for that nice slim fit. You can size up once for a little bit more of a relaxed fit, and then you could also even size up twice for a more oversized fit. That's about it for me. If you have any videos, any patterns that you want to see, let me know in the comments or on TikTok. And without further ado, we will get into the video. Before we get into the tutorial, you want to make sure that your pattern is cut out, all of your pattern pieces, the main or outer and the lining, as well as your interfacing, and that all of the prep and fusing is completed. So we'll start by attaching our pocket bags to the front and side panels. So working with one pocket bag at a time, we'll place it right sides together to each of the front panels and side panels. We'll align it with our notches and then pin in place. All right, we're getting ready to sew this down. We want to make sure that we are only sewing between the notches. So you'll start at the first notch, back stitch, sew down to the second notch, and then back stitch to lock that seam down. Then we'll go ahead and flip that pocket bag to the right side, and we're going to edge stitch this down. So you want to make sure that where we started and stopped the stitch before, we're doing the same thing on the outside. So you can put some pins down like so to help you know where to start and stop, since we can't really see it very easily. But once we have this out of the way, that is the pocket bag attached, and we're going to repeat that on the other 3 panel pieces. Once all of the pocket bags are attached, we're going to go ahead and join our front and side panels. So we'll place one front panel right sides together with the corresponding side panel, and we're going to pin really well down the seam and all along the pocket bag. Then we're going to go ahead and sew this down. So we'll sew from the top edge down to the first pocket notch, pivot at the notch, and then sew all around the curved edge of the pocket bag. When we return back to the front and side panels, we'll pivot at that second notch and then continue sewing down to the hem. When you do the other side, it'll just be the opposite of this. So you'll sew from the bottom to the top. And I also just wanted to say, you guys, I tried really hard to get good camera angles, but I just have an obsession with being in the frame, I think. So I guess just please bear with me for the times where I am in the frame and it's out of focus a little bit. I really hope you get the gist, but if not, let me know. I am happy to refilm this video. I will be making this jacket at least several more times. So you know what, I think I'll just plan on doing this video again. So the seam allowance for these pieces is going to go towards the front. That's how the pocket will sit when we wear it in the jacket. So we're gonna go ahead and top stitch the seam allowance down with the seam allowance pointing towards the front. For top stitching, I start from the top and sew right until the pocket opening, back stitch, and then start at the bottom of the pocket opening, sewing all the way down to the hem, and then back stitch. Repeat this on the other side. Now that our front and side panels are joined, we can attach the front yoke. So we'll place our corresponding front yoke right sides together with our new front panel, and then we'll go ahead and pin and sew. The seam allowance should be pressed towards the yoke. Do not press it here because this fabric is not really, it doesn't really respond to pressing well, but once you do that, go ahead and top stitch. And then you'll want to repeat on the other side. And we'll go ahead and join our side and back panels together. So take your back panel and place it right sides together with the corresponding side panel. We have a notch somewhere around the middle area and then also our hem notches. So go ahead and line those up and then pin well. And sew that down. Our seam allowance here is going to be pressed towards the back panels and then top stitched. Once you have that done, make sure you repeat on the other side. Now we can join our essentially the entire jacket bodice together. So place your center back panels right sides together and pin that down, and then go ahead and take it to your machine and sew. And it would probably be a good idea to also check your bobbin and make sure that it has thread. Anyways, this seam is now going to be pressed open if you can, and then we're going to go ahead and top stitch down both sides of the seam. Now we'll go ahead and grab our back yoke and we'll place it right sides together with our back panel. We have some notches, so go ahead and make sure those match up, pin well, and then go ahead and sew that down. The seam allowance here will be pressed towards the yoke, just like on the front panels, and then go ahead and top stitch that down. All right, things are coming together. We're making some good progress. So we're gonna go ahead and place our shoulder seams right sides together and pin those, of course, and get those sewn down. With our shoulders, we also want to press those open and top stitch both sides, just like we did on the center back. Now we'll get started on our sleeves. So each sleeve has 2 seams and 2 pieces. So working with one set at a time, we'll put the upper sleeve and under sleeve right sides together. We'll match the notches at the elbow and the hem and pin the rest of that seam in place and sew. And then go ahead and repeat on the other side. Then we'll press this seam open and then join our sleeve pieces right sides together. We'll pin this well and then take that to the machine and sew and repeat on the other sleeve. And you definitely want to make sure that you are sewing 2 opposite sleeves here and not just the same sleeve. So just make sure when you're pinning that they look like they are doing the opposite thing to one another. Then we'll press that seam open on both sleeves, and we're going to find our hem notches and we're going to fold up at the hem notches and press that into place and then turn our sleeves inside out. Okay, so we'll set these sleeves into the jacket body. So with our sleeves right side out and the jacket wrong side out, you'll work with one sleeve at a time, putting it with the corresponding armhole, and they should be right sides together. there are notches at the shoulder, the front, and the back. So make sure that you get all those notches matched up and that you pin really, really well, and make sure that the ease is distributed evenly at the top of the armhole. There's not too much ease, so it shouldn't be too crazy, but just make sure that everything is nice and even, and then go ahead and sew that down. I'm also going to clip into the curves at this armhole very carefully, making sure not to cut into any of the stitches, but just to get the armhole to lay down very nicely. And then I will press this really well and repeat for the other sleeve. All right, we are moving on to the zipper. So we're gonna mark 5/8 of an inch below the start of the neckline, and then we're gonna go ahead and get our zipper ready to go. So with the zipper zipped up, that is exactly what it's gonna look like, but we wanna sew it right sides together with the fabric. So the zipper teeth will be turned out like so. Then we'll align the top stops with the marking we made 5/8 of an inch below the neckline, and will pin in place. Also, when you get to the bottom, you want to make sure that the end of the zipper does not go past the hem notches. If it does, you need a shorter zipper. So once our zipper is pinned in place, we will baste it in. So I'm using the longest stitch setting on my machine and my regular presser foot, and I'm just sewing about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance just to get the zipper in place. Once that first side is down, I like to then remove the pins from the other side essentially and zip up that side of the zipper, still making sure that the top stop is 5/8 of an inch below the neckline. I'm gonna mark right where my yoke hits, and I'm also gonna mark where the zipper ends, then repin the other side of the zipper matching all of these markings, and then baste that side in place. From the other side of the jacket, you will be sewing from bottom to top. I guess you don't technically have to, but it's much easier to do it this way. And there's also the zipper pull, so you want to make sure that that is moved out of the way and that you don't sew over that. Now that our zipper is basted in place, we're going to zip it up, and we're going to check that the neckline lines up, the yokes line up, and the hem lines up. And if that is the case, then we will switch to a zipper foot, and we'll just make that basting stitch permanent. We'll use our regular seam allowance of 1/2 inch and our normal stitch length and get that sewn down. And then once you finish both sides, you want to zip it again and just make sure everything is exactly where you want it to be. And then we can move on to pressing our hem. For the hem, you'll want to find those hem notches. They're about 1.5 inches up from the bottom of the jacket, and then you'll go ahead and press that entire hem in place. Then we'll go ahead and prep our collar. So we'll take our collar pieces and place them right sides together. We'll pin the upper edge of the collar and sew that down, and the upper edge is going to be the side without notches. Once you have that sewn, go ahead and press that seam and set that aside for later. Now we'll go ahead and grab our lining pieces. So taking our back lining, I'm going to place the notches right sides together and fold that excess fabric to either side. And then we'll go ahead and just make a short stitch to hold this pleat in place. Then we'll go ahead and grab our back facing, and we'll put it right sides together with our back lining. As you can see, these are opposite curves, so it's just going to require a little bit of patience and a lot of pinning to get this right. So go ahead and pin those together really, really well and sew that down. Once that seam is sewn down, you're going to want to flip it right sides out and just check for any puckering, make sure everything is nice and flush. And then we can go ahead and clip into this curve. Again, be careful with this. We just want to make sure that everything is going to lay nice and flat. Oh, and if you're adding in a little clothing tag, now would be the perfect time to do it. All right, we're gonna set our back lining aside and we'll work on our front lining pieces. So taking our front facing and front lining, we're going to place these right sides together and pin well. We have a couple notches here at our curves to help us with alignment. So go ahead and make sure that those match up and just take your time and pin this really well. Once those are pinned, we'll go ahead and sew that down. And we will also clip into the seam allowance a little bit here, again, just to make sure that everything is nice and flat. Then we'll go ahead and give all of our lining pieces a nice press, pushing the seam allowance towards the lining. Now we can place our lining pieces right sides together and pin at the shoulders and side seam, and then we can sew each of those seams down all in one go. Then we're going to put together our lining sleeves in the same exact way that we did the outer. So we will pin and sew the first seam that has that notch at the elbow. Then pin and sew the second seam. We will also set these sleeves in the exact same way that we did with the outer. So making sure that the sleeves and the lining are right sides together, make sure that all of your notches match up and you pin really well, and then go ahead and sew both armholes. Now we can attach our lining to the main jacket. So we'll take our center fronts and align them right sides together and pin well. Now when we approach this bottom edge, you'll see that we have previously folded up and pressed the hem. So what we're going to do is on our lining, we're going to mark 1 inch up from that folded edge of the hem. okay, 1 inch above the folded hem, and we're going to make a mark on that front facing or the lining of the jacket, and we're going to repeat on the other side. This mark is where we're going to stop sewing, so make sure that it is nice and visible for you. Once that's ready, you can sew your center fronts together. And I haven't switched to my regular presser foot yet, just because we're still sewing right where the zipper is. And then you definitely want to make sure that you stop sewing at the mark that we made and back stitch. And make sure that you are mindful of the zipper pull when you do the other side. Now we can go ahead and take care of our hem. So with the jacket still in its orientation from when we sewed the zipper fronts, we're going to pull our lining down to meet the main shell of the jacket. The lining is shorter than the main, so at the center front you will see that there's going to be a little bit of a gap there. We will address that in the next step, but for now, just align the raw edge of the main outer shell to the raw edge of the lining. Really want to make sure that this is nice and even, so take your time with the pinning. And this is what it will look like from the outer side, so that fold is still there and our lining is attached to the raw hem. Now we can sew down our hem, and where we have that little excess fabric at the center fronts, we're just going to move it out of the way of our seam, and we're still using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so go ahead and sew that entire hem down. We still have our entire neckline open, so we don't need any openings in any other part of the jacket, which makes that really nice and easy for us. And once you approach the other end of the hem, make sure that you move that excess fabric out of the way again. All right, now we're ready to turn our jacket inside out. We are nearing the finish line, you guys. So let's turn the jacket inside out, and then we will address our sleeves. So what we want to do is put our lining sleeve into the main sleeve, just as it would be if you were wearing the jacket. So make sure that nothing is twisted, and especially that your seams are aligned. Working with one sleeve at a time, we're going to pull that lining down just a little bit to meet the raw edge of the main jacket. Again, this lining piece is shorter than the main. Then we're going to find our seams. So we have 2 seams on each sleeve, and we're going to pin those together. And it's important to note right now, if you have not done a lined sleeve, they are going to be wrong sides facing, and that's just the process of finishing this sleeve hem. So this pin is going to be temporary. Once those seams are pinned in place, we're going to reach through the neckline opening and we're going to pull out those sleeves. Be careful of pricking yourself. It's really easy to do here. So once we have our sleeves pulled out through the neckline, we're going to locate that pin that we put, and we are going to remove it, and we're going to orient the sleeves so that they are right sides together. This is why I like to put 2 pins in so you don't get confused. And just as we had them wrong sides facing with their seams matching, we want to turn that around so that they are right sides facing. Then repeat that exact process with the other pin that we put in place. Then you can pin throughout the rest of the sleeve opening. Once the sleeves are all pinned, it'll kind of look a little funky, but you just have to trust the process. Go ahead and sew that down and repeat for the other sleeve. Now we can pull our sleeves out. You will find that they are so nice and beautiful. Since we already pressed our hem up, all we really have to do is find that hem again, do a nice extra little press there just for some shaping, but for the most part, that is our sleeves all done. So So let's go ahead and move on to the center front hem. So there is that little bit of excess fabric. What I like to do is push it down towards the hem and then push in the seam allowance towards the inside. So I guess it's easier to see than it is for me to explain here, but this is what it should look like. There's just going to be a little bit of extra fabric. So once that is tucked in nice and flush, go ahead and pin that in place and then give each of your center fronts a top stitch. And there is most of the jacket done. The last step here is going to be attaching our collar. So in order to prepare for that, we want to pin our lining and our main neckline together, matching all of our notches and things like that. And then we'll just base this in place so that nothing shifts when we are doing the collar. So for the collar, we're going to align our jacket and the collar right sides together, working from the outside of the jacket. So we're going to match up all of our notches. So the notches are going to correspond with the shoulder seams, and then we have a 2.5-inch extension that we're just going to allow to hang off. We also have our 1/2 inch of seam allowance on the other end of the collar, so definitely make sure that you leave that there. We do need to close the collar. So we'll start on one end of the collar, making sure to backstitch before that seam allowance, and then continue sewing down through the rest of the collar, making sure that you are checking that fabric underneath, that we don't have any creases or puckering. Just take your time here, and then once you reach the other end of the collar, you'll want to again backstitch right before the extension. Once the collar is attached to the jacket, we will press the seam allowance towards the collar. Then we're going to press the inside edge of the neckline up 1/2 inch, and we'll do that for the entire length of the collar. Once that side is pressed, we will go ahead and shut the short ends. So all we're going to do is place the collar pieces right sides together, and we're going to sew along our seam allowance, close up the short ends of the collar, and repeat on the other side. Then before we flip our collar right side out, we want to just trim the seam allowance down so that we can get a nice sharp corner. And then you can see on this side that there's like a little bit more than a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the top. So I'm just going to sew parallel to my zipper to close off this side. Now that the ends of the collar are sewn, we're just going to turn them right sides out, and you can use a chopstick or something similar that has a dull end to it so that you can get them nice and sharp. To attach the inside of the collar to the neckline, we're doing a stitch in the ditch, and what I like to do is pin from the outside, but I'm paying really close attention to the inside. And what I'm looking for is that the inner edge of the collar goes just slightly past the original stitch line, because one, we don't want to see the original stitch line in the final garment, and two, it's not going to catch when we do our stitch in the ditch. So just make sure that it goes ever so slightly past the stitch line, and that is how I'm pinning it down. I'm also pinning from the outside because that's where we're going to be sewing it from. I know we've been sewing for a while now, but you really do want to take your time here. It's going to give you the best results if you pin well, and just make sure that that stitch line is encased in the seam. Alright, now we are ready to do our stitch in the ditch. We're sewing directly into the original seam that attaches the collar to the main jacket. This is going to give us a nice invisible or invisible-esque finish. This is definitely not the easiest of things to sew, so take your time and be patient as you can with it, and you're really going to get very familiar with your machine. I'm extremely surprised that my head was not all over this shot. I'm very lucky. We're going to stop sewing and back stitch right at the end of the jacket neckline. So here is what the stitch in the ditch should look like. From the inside, you have your seam that is like really close to the edge. And then from the outside, it should be tucked into that existing seam. Now to officially finish the collar, or at least the sewing of the collar, we still have to attach the snap. We're gonna top stitch around the entire perimeter of the collar, or I should say edge stitch actually. We're gonna edge stitch the entire collar. I like to start in the middle and finish in the middle. And that is the collar attached, you guys. Now all that is left to do is mark our snap placements and then install them. I would recommend putting the jacket on and seeing where the collar fits most comfortably for that first placement, and then you can put the second snap wherever you want, to be honest. It's really just decorative, but if you want hard numbers, I would start with the lower snap, which is going to be the one that's underneath, and that is going to go 1/2 inch from the edge of the collar. Then place your upper snaps about 1 inch apart from each other on the extension. And then to install the snaps, definitely follow the instructions on your specific like snap fastener kit. And that's not just because I'm literally like so far in the shot. I can't even show you how I did it. Once those snaps are installed, that is it. You've made it. And here is the final look. All right, guys, thank you so much for spending who really even knows how long you just spent making this jacket with me. If you feel so inclined to share your makes, tag me. I'd love to see them. Thank you so much for supporting my patterns and trusting me to be part of this creative process. It just really means a lot. I will see you guys in the next one.